Greetings. I'm happy to be here. I'm reviewing William Least Heat Moon's Blue Highways, A Journey into America, published in 1983 and republished in 2013. William Forbes, an associate professor of geography and sustainability at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas. And this is for the Book Sandwiched In program at Brighton Memorial Library in Rochester, New York, June 2021. Thank you to the library for the invitation to review this nice book about William Least Heat Moon's story of his road trip around the US from mid-March to mid-June 1978. During those same months, I was rambling myself around Europe and North Africa. Many of you likely relate to one of his central themes, the ability of travel to get outside yourself and renew perspectives. I've been to a few places he visited, while many of his other encounters bring similar place experiences to mind. Perhaps Blue Highways also made you think of related travel books, films, and music. I'll try to weave these thoughts in along with answering insightful questions at the end posed by my older cousin, Brighton Memorial Library patron, Diane Resch. Excuse me. Hopefully this will stimulate ideas as we emerge from the pandemic and think about traveling ourselves. Luckily, we are not the first to take a retrospective look at Blue Highways. From 2006 to 2008, the father and son team Edgar Ayler III and Edgar Ayler IV retraced the author's route, often separately in short segments, photographing landscapes and re-interviewing characters. I've included a reference in the presentation along with my own photos to add to Heat Moon's many photographs of people in the book. Another retrospective comes in the foreword of the 2013 edition, written by author and activist Bill McKibben. McKibben lauds Heat Moon's ability to document diverse locals' conversations, turning results into literature while reflecting on community and personal change. McKibben cites some positive trends since 1983, noting how the number of farms and farmers markets have increased. McKibben cites a sociological study showing an average customer will have 10 times more conversations at a farmer's market than at a standard grocery. I thought I would start with the New York section of the book. Heat Moon chronicles the long-term challenges of an Italian family's small farm in the Finger Lakes region. Rochester readers may be familiar with the rise of farmers markets and more local products at Wegmans, maybe, since 1978. A quick search today reveals 400 farmers markets in New York State, and Monroe County has a dozen, including one in Brighton, along with 3 dozen curbside markets. There are also farmers markets along Heat Moon's route in Lockport, Batavia, and Canandaigua. Try to pull up a few slides here, if I can operate the Zoom correctly here. For the share function, sorry. I will keep reading. Least Heat Moon, when he entered New York, came in through Niagara Falls and followed the Niagara River north toward Lake Ontario, then picked up New York 93 through Warren's Corners, Lockport, onto State 5 and into Batavia, to Leroy, and on through the darkness to the west edge of Canandaigua Lake. After staying with his friend near Cheshire and learning the rich family history of the nearby Masucci farm, he moved on to the birthplace of the Mormon religion near Palmyra, then east on Highway 31 along the Erie Canal through Conquest and Cato to Rome, New York. Heat Moon then drove north into the Adirondacks through Alder Creek, Blue Mountain Lake, and Route 28 by Mount Marcy, dropping down to Lake George and crossing into Vermont by ferry. Are there particular places or stories from his New York segment that come to mind for you there at Brighton Memorial Library? Here are some slides here to help illustrate some of the points. Here is a retrospective by the father and son team, Blue Highways Revisited, and some key points about Bill McKibben's excellent foreword in the book. Here is a map I sketched with a blue highway across New York State, following the route I just described. And his trip through the Finger Lakes region as part of it. Heat Moon brings up food quite a bit, as I'm sure you remember in reading the book. And he even uses the term slow food. And interestingly enough, Alice Waters has just come out with a book, We Are What We Eat, a Slow Food Manifesto. The term slow food became popular about 1989 after Heat Moon brought up the term in his book. So I'm not sure how much influence he had, but Alice Waters definitely had a lot of interest in influence in the slow food movement. She runs a restaurant in Berkeley, California. One of my favorite parts of the book was his reference to food in diners and cafeterias as part of his trip. And one I especially remember is after being stuck in the snow in Cedar Breaks, Utah, Heat Moon finally gets out and enters a university cafeteria in Cedar City, Utah, where he piles on the food as he's a bit happy to be warm and alive. And right after that, he has a great conversation with a Hopi medical student. That's very interesting and illustrates some of the double worlds, living in two worlds that some Hopis live, the modern world and the Hopi world. Another feature that I appreciated is some of those adventures. I had one of my own once, like Heat Moon. I was from back east and I did not realize how cold and snowy the mountains of the West can get, even in late April. And I took a trip in 1974 from Los Angeles to Portland and rode up into Kings Canyon and Sequoia National Park up about 5,000 feet. And I got stuck in a snowstorm, sorry. And that had a big, made a big impression on me. I was bicycling up that high and encountered 7 inches of snow the day I arrived there. Another event that Heat Moon brings up is when he came through Texas, he would visit our Cattle Mounds historical site about 30 miles west of town where we are. And it's really a beautiful place. He went on top of the mound and was having an experience there when a lightning storm came through and he had to drop down from the mound. And that also occurred in April of 2019, when they were having a Caddo ceremony, much as you see in the top two pictures. And instead of just a thunderstorm with lightning, a tornado came through, a serious one that actually killed one person and seriously injured an archaeologist we know of. So these major events where you take a risk is something that is part of Heat Moon's book, these little adventures, like when he tries to find his his ancestor's grave in North Carolina in the dark. That's another little adventure he encounters, in addition to Cedar Breaks, Utah. Heat Moon's book is a bit of a resistance against modernization and homogenization of culture. Other books along these lines are The Geography of Nowhere from the 1990s by James Kunstler on that very subject, homogenization of our landscape, and also Wendell Berry's Unsettling of America, excellent book about culture, agriculture, and modernization. He lives in Kentucky and practices horse walking, of all things. Not the most efficient way to manage your woodlot, but it's something of an art for him. He's excellent critic of modern society. Other music that might relate to the theme in the book. Lucinda Williams has some great road songs, such as Crescent City, talking about back highways, the side of the road, and the Flatlanders, another Texas group that does white Freightliner blues, about clearing your mind by getting back on the road, which is all about this book, Blue Highways. Heat Moon drives along the border and talks about the Sierra Madre in Mexico as simply some sharp peaks. But this is a very rich area with layers and layers of history, where I did my dissertation. I liked his part of the book where he drives along the border, and especially when he goes to Hachita, New Mexico, which is one of the most remote towns in the country, I think, down near the border crossing at Antelope Wells. Other media references, Nomadland has a similar theme. The Oscar-winning picture from last year refers to recovering from a loss or a life experience by traveling, and also rethinking the value of material versus spiritual life. And, so there are some themes that recur in the media with Blue Highways, Nomadland, and other parts of our culture. A major theme is the labyrinth, the Hopi labyrinth, and that is referred to towards the end of the book, when he tries to think about the meaning of the whole trip. And he, as in a maze or labyrinth, you get lost sometimes along the way, and have frustrations and delays. But all in all, you make it out through the circle and find your way. So it's also a way to think about being both in your internal family world and out in the world at the same time. It's kind of duality that the Hopi student he encounters lives at the college in Utah. Other scenes on the route of his travels are the Northern Sierras, where serious fires have taken out towns. More recently, highway pointed towards Mount Shasta. And in Oregon, there's Klamath Lake that he drives by. And my wife and I actually drove in a Econoline van back in about 1989 and ran out of gas, as Heat Moon almost did several times. We did run out of gas along Klamath Lake and found our way out of that predicament. But Barry Lopez here is one of the best nature writers. He unfortunately passed away in December 2020. But I thought I'd mention him. He lived in Eugene, Oregon, up in the Cascades a bit there. And if you're wanting to follow a book along this theme that is more recent, James and Deborah Fallows did Our Towns in 2013 and have an excellent website. And they have a related film now that's on HBO, all about flying to all these different small towns in America, but talking to people about how they plan their towns, make them successful. What are some of the good points of leadership in these places? It's a really good book that our faculty reading group read a couple of years ago here. Another one we read that's positive recently was Rutger Bregman's Humankind, A Hopeful History, that makes you take a more positive view of some of the examples of poor human behavior in the past. For instance, they look at an actual island where kids were stuck as in Lord of the Flies, and they actually helped each other instead of becoming vicious. And so there's all kinds of examples of people acting good instead of bad in this book, which is kind of uplifting. That's a quick overview. I'm going to jump out of this. It's just some of my background. Too many degrees. And also my wife and I like soccer. I do a lot of biking, and we've rescued about 75 dogs. And I've traveled to about 50 countries in 49 states. But I just want to hit a few more points in the document I created. I can send that to you. I thought Heat Moon's ecological knowledge was fascinating. He made great observations about the role of soils and limestone in bluegrass nutrients that were fed to Kentucky thoroughbreds, the dynamic nature of barrier islands in North Carolina, the invasiveness of kudzu and water hyacinth in South Carolina, the straightening and channeling of the Mississippi River, taking water away from the Atchafalaya wetlands in Louisiana, and in general, the straightening of highways and rivers as examples of gains in efficiency, yet loss of local features, such as downtown local business, sediment fertilized floodplains. So he showed a remarkable ability to mix ecology, history, personal interactions, and concerns for minorities such as Native Americans, Blacks, and others. I thought his visit to Selma, Alabama was interesting. It made me think about current issues for African Americans, and had things really changed. In Selma, they thought they hadn't changed yet after 10, 15 years after walking over the bridge and marching. And some Blacks I know here now say they still haven't changed enough. So it's an issue that keeps recurring there. Finally, towards the end, he brings in some interesting ideas, not just the labyrinth, but he ends with a Navajo wind chant. And my cousin Diane, who asked me to do this review, she had a few questions that I could answer or try to answer. And one of them is, how much of the author's philosophies come from Native culture? I would suggest most of them. You probably noted that he carried Black Elk Speaks in the van along with Whitman's Leaves of Grass, but he seemed to refer much more to Black Elk Speaks than Whitman. In the end, he refers, when he's trying to summarize his whole trip, refers to the Hopi map of emergence and the labyrinth. I felt that one of the most important encounters in the book was his interaction with that Hopi student in Cedar City, Utah, after nearly freezing to death overnight at 10,000 feet. He has breakfast with him, and the student seems to embody a transition zone between the purely Hopi lifestyle and modern civilization. He was trying to be a physician and return to the Hopi reservation, which itself, I've been there. It's in a very, very unique place. They don't let you visit villages without a guide. It's a bit like Bhutan, the Asian country that's trying to retain its culture, and they don't let tourists go over the countryside willy-nilly. You have to be on a small guided tour, and that limits cultural change, so to speak. And the Hopi reservation is like that as well. That's partly why he had so much trouble actually striking up a conversation where he could. Most places, the Hopis were more difficult to talk to there. Diane asked how he got around the entire country on $428. And she actually guessed the answer, inflation. I looked up how much $428 in 1978 is equal to today, and it's $1,753. And of course, those of you who have traveled probably realize that lodging is one of the most expensive parts of travel. And of course, he stayed in his van most every night. So, and also the price of gas was 63 cents a gallon in 1978. So that's how he got around the country for 2 or 3 months with $428. Diane asked, the pandemic of 2020 has made many people reevaluate their jobs and lives. What is important for fulfillment, and what are our goals and dreams now? You saw places in the book where he would question the importance of material wealth. And Bill McKibben, who wrote the foreword, brings that up in his book, Deep Economy. He cites a now pretty large body of research on happiness. And one study that's pretty thorough found that households reach a base point of income. I mean, happiness increases with increased income to a point, a base point of income, and it seemed to be about $70,000 a year in the US and maybe $10,000 in developing nations. This is 2008. But happiness would increase until you got to that point. And then as your income went above 70,000 a year, your happiness did not rise with it in a correlating way. And in developing nations, 10,000 was the kind of the plateau for happiness. So that's an interesting body of work that questions pure materialism and income there. And Diane finally asks a couple of more questions. He describes tiny towns which may or may not survive in 2021. Does Dimebox, Texas still exist? And I can say, yes, it does. I was there not long ago, and it's still an active town or hamlet, so to speak. It's very small. I visited to help a landowner. There's been a lot of wealth growing in Austin, Texas, with Dell computers and now Tesla and all kinds of other service sector firms there. And this person bought a ranch. He was relatively young and bought a ranch near Dimebox. And I helped him think about what some of the things he could do with the ranch there. But that's not your traditional old-time Dimebox resident that Mr. Heat Moon ran into. So there are quite a few small towns. We have strange names like Cut and Shoot, Possum Kingdom, Peru, Italy, Texas. A lot of small towns that are largely agricultural ranching that are still surviving. And I don't think I've seen any actually disappear completely. Some have grown with new industries, others have declined a bit, but they seem to hang in there, these small towns. So I hope that provides a little bit of thought on Blue Highways. You probably have some thoughts of your own. I thought it was an inspiring book. I love the references to risk-taking, to food on the road, to history, ecology, Native Americans, minorities, and just the general idea of getting out there to stop thinking about yourself so much and gain a new perspective there. I'll stop with a little adventure of my own. I especially love the points in the book when he thinks about turning back. There was a point on rough roads in eastern Tennessee early on, and around the same time walking in the dark to find his ancestor's grave in North Carolina, yet he kept going, and he was ultimately rewarded with this trip. Some of my favorite memories are bicycling in the dark to a destination. Don't try this at home, but I was preparing for a 1973 summer tour of Scotland at 17. I did a trial run through the Berkshires and back to Route 7 along the Housatonic River in Connecticut. My parents, trying to meet me, drove into a dark Macedonia Brook State Park and asked a scout troop from New York City if they'd seen a young guy come through on a bicycle. One of the inner city boys replied, "What did he do, escape from an insane asylum?" More recently, an Appalachian version was me biking from a Dahlonega, Georgia hostel to the top of a 4,000-foot mountain. And on the return, I ran into thunderstorms as I pedaled over Neal's Gap, which is along the Appalachian Trail, and down the other side through a driving rain, lightning, thunder, slowly navigating a dark descent. It was what you'd call an epic experience. I was a bit happy to be alive the next morning. These risks getting out there should be selected carefully, but they often are some of the defining moments that you remember in your life. So I think this was definitely one of William Least Heat Moon's defining moments, the whole trip, but also moments within it. So hopefully some of us can do the same in a measured, reasonable way as we emerge from the pandemic and continue to explore the world. So thanks for inviting me, and I will stop at that. Thank you very much.